the story of a young pilot who made a significant contribution to victory in World War II. The sky was ablaze with the fires of war when the young pilot, barely 18, gripped the controls of his fighter with a forceful mixture of fear and determination that only youth could have felt so strong. The roar of the engine drowned out the distant rumble of artillery, but every explosion on the ground seemed to echo in his chest. This was his first mission, but the weight of duty pressed down on him like the heavy wings of the plane he commanded. Flying over forests and villages scarred by war, he felt the pulse of a Europe engulfed in turmoil, a rhythm of destruction that threatened to break even the strongest hearts. The air battle began suddenly. Enemy planes emerged from the clouds like dark shadows, and the young pilot's hands moved almost instinctively. He dodged, banked, and fired, but a sudden shudder ran through the plane, the hiss of failing hydraulic systems, a violent jolt, and then the terrifying silence of failing mechanisms. The plane was hit, torn apart by shells that shattered like paper, and the sky became a chaotic blur of fire, smoke, and flaming clouds. Thanks to the skill honed in training and pure adrenaline, he managed to steer the dying machine toward the dense forest below, praying that the treetops would cushion his fall rather than end his life instantly. When he finally landed, wounded but alive, the young pilot emerged from the wreckage into a forest that seemed simultaneously alien and alive. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot made his heart beat faster. He had no food, almost no water, and only the survival instinct honed in him by the war. He knew he had to move on. His mission wasn't complete. Somewhere beyond those endless trees, his commander awaited him. The intelligence he carried couldn't fall into enemy hands, and the survival of his comrades depended on him reaching base. The forest became both a refuge and a prison. He learned to recognize signals, a subtle shift in wind direction, the scent of distant smoke signaling a human presence, the movement of animals as a warning or a landmark. The nights were the hardest, filled with shadows that seemed alive and sounds that transformed ordinary branches into potential threats. He wrapped himself in whatever scraps of fabric he could find, conserving his warmth, conserving his strength, and forcing himself to stay awake long enough to avoid the enemy patrols ruthlessly combing the area. Hunger tore at his stomach, thirst parched his throat, but the young pilot pressed forward, driven by a sense of purpose far stronger than the fear that surrounded him. As days turned to nights, and nights to endless days, he discovered small victories for survival, a stream for water, berries to eat, fallen branches for a fire. Yet every step was calculated. He avoided roads where enemy vehicles might patrol, hid under trees when shadows fell across open clearings, and forced himself to suppress any instincts that might betray his presence. The forest was full of dangers, both visible and invisible. Venomous snakes hiding under leaves, predatory wolves prowling at night, and sudden storms threatening to wash away any trace he might leave on the path to salvation. Despite exhaustion and constant fear, the young pilot did not despair. He recalled the lessons he'd been taught before the war: patience, observation, adaptation. He listened to the whispers of the forest as if to a teacher, learning to discern signs of danger and opportunity. Hours spent motionless in the undergrowth taught him restraint. Days of slow movement strengthened his endurance. His mind sharpened, mapping every tree, every stream, every ridge, creating a subconscious pattern that guided him forward. Every step brought him closer to his goal, but he knew one false step could ruin everything. And so just when fatigue threatened to break him completely, he reached the outskirts of an enemy-occupied village. Observation from afar allowed him to identify patrol patterns, guard movements, and weaknesses in their control. He learned to move only in the shadows, camouflage himself with mud and foliage, and imitate the sounds of the forest to avoid detection. It was a dangerous ballet of movement and stillness, and one false step could mean capture or death. But the young pilot moved forward, driven by desperation and a sense of duty. The village was a fortress of enemy control, a living trap that throbbed with the rhythm of occupation. Every street, every building, every alley whispered danger. From his vantage point, hidden among the dense undergrowth at the edge of the village, the young pilot observed the soldiers' routines. He saw how they changed shifts, how they interrogated local civilians, how they moved in squads, methodically patrolling the areas they believed secure. Each detail mattered. One miscalculation, one wrong breath, one moment of haste, and he would be discovered, and his mission, his very life, would be over. For hours he waited, blending with the shadows, listening to the ambient sounds of the village, the clatter of boots on cobblestones, the distant barking of dogs, the hum of whispered conversations in a language he had learned to understand through study and observation. Hunger gnawed at him, but he could not afford to move blindly. He scavenged what he could from the forest edge, roots, small animals, and even discarded scraps from a hidden path used by villagers to sustain his energy, knowing full well that a single mistake born of weakness could betray him. Then the unthinkable happened. A routine patrol passed dangerously close. The pilot froze, his breath shallow, heart hammering like a drum in his chest. The soldiers were near, scanning every shadow, yet somehow he remained invisible, a ghost among the foliage. He learned to hold still for long stretches, blending his form into the environment, understanding that survival was not just physical endurance, but mental discipline. The forest had trained him in patience. Fear had sharpened his instincts. Each passing patrol reinforced the fragile thread connecting him to life. Despite the danger, he had a mission to complete. Somewhere beyond this village, beyond these lines of enemy control, was the command center where vital intelligence was needed. The knowledge he carried about the enemy's movements, the captured village, and the presence of spies within their own ranks could change the outcome of entire operations. Each piece of information was a thread in the larger tapestry of the war, and failure was unthinkable. He moved cautiously, using the terrain, the trees, and even the wind to mask his presence, inching forward as the world seemed to shrink around him into a sequence of survival puzzles. The forest behind him had become both a shield and a guide. Streams provided water, and the shape of the land revealed hidden paths. Fallen logs created bridges over treacherous terrain, while shadows provided cover from aerial surveillance. The young pilot discovered that he could interpret the smallest movements in the natural world. A bird startled in the brush indicated danger. A sudden change in wind direction suggested approaching soldiers, and even the subtle scent of smoke from distant fires could hint at enemy activity. He became a student of nature under the harshest of teachers, necessity. But even the forest could not protect him indefinitely. One evening, while resting under a thick canopy, He was spotted. Enemy soldiers surrounded him, cutting off the escape routes he had carefully memorized. They captured him, binding his hands and eyes, dragging him into an unknown fate. Fear surged, yet he refused to surrender to it fully. He knew that panic would be his downfall. The mind, he realized, was the ultimate weapon, more critical than strength or even skill in combat. He observed, memorized, and waited for an opening. Every detail about his captors, every routine, every subtle flaw in their security became a potential key to escape. Days passed in captivity. Food was scarce, conditions harsh, yet he remained resolute. He watched the guards, learned their patterns, and waited for the exact moment when weakness could be exploited. Sleep was a luxury, but he used brief moments of inattention by his captors to study the environment, noting the construction of the cell, the timing of footsteps, and the routes that led to freedom. The young pilot understood that survival was now a battle of wits, a game of patience, observation, and cunning that rivaled any air combat he had faced. Finally, opportunity came. A distracted guard left a latch unfastened. A loose board offered a narrow escape route, and with a calculated risk, the young pilot seized his chance. The forest welcomed him once more, the canopy hiding him, the wind carrying him forward, and the earth itself seeming to guide his steps toward freedom. Exhaustion weighed on him, yet adrenaline sharpened his senses. Every step became a test of endurance, every sound a potential threat, every shadow a possible enemy. But determination overpowered fear, duty to his comrades, to his mission, and to the very idea of survival fueled each motion. As he moved deeper into the forest, navigating by instinct and memory, the young pilot reflected on the human spirit under pressure. Survival was not merely a physical act, it was a mental and emotional discipline. Every pain endured, every threat avoided, every calculated risk taken was a testament to human resilience. He learned that fear could be a guide rather than a master, that patience was more powerful than brute force, and that every obstacle contained within it the possibility of triumph if approached with intelligence, courage, and unwavering resolve. At last, after days of hardship, evasion, and careful navigation, he approached the lines of his command. His body was worn, his clothes tattered, and his face gaunt from hunger, yet in his hands he carried information that could alter the course of operations. The journey had tested every fiber of his being, but he had survived. The forest had taught him, the enemy had tested him, and through the crucible of extreme adversity, he had emerged not just alive, but determined, aware, and ready to deliver the intelligence that could save countless lives and ensure the success of their mission. Returning to friendly lines did not mean safety. The pilot knew that information of this magnitude was as dangerous as enemy fire. It had to reach the commander intact, without interception. Every step through the dense forest felt like navigating a labyrinth of danger, as if the very trees conspired to test his endurance. His body ached from days without proper food or sleep, yet his mind remained razor-sharp. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every distant sound became a puzzle, friend or foe, predator or passerby. The presence of spies within their own ranks made the journey even more perilous. Intelligence indicated that someone from his side had betrayed information to the enemy. This knowledge forced him to act with utmost caution. He could trust no one outside the inner circle of command, no local villager, no passing courier. Every encounter could be fatal, every whisper a potential trap. The young pilot learned that vigilance had to be absolute. His survival depended not only on stealth, but also on discretion, patience, and the ability to read human behavior under stress. One evening, as dusk settled over the forest, he found a hidden path used by hunters long forgotten. The trail was narrow, overgrown, and fraught with natural traps, thorny bushes, hidden roots, and sudden drops, but it offered the quickest route to friendly territory. He moved silently, crouched low, using the shadows and fading light to his advantage. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, fatigue clawed at his limbs, yet he pushed forward. Every breath, every step was a calculated risk. One misstep could lead to capture or injury, and both could render the mission impossible. When he finally glimpsed the first signs of human habitation under friendly control, a distant campfire, the low murmur of voices, relief surged through him. Yet he restrained it, knowing that enemy patrols could still be near. He observed the perimeter from a safe distance, noting the positions of guards, the patrol patterns, and the layout of the camp. He waited for the moment when he could safely approach without raising alarm, analyzing each possibility with the precision of a pilot calculating an airstrike. Inside the camp, the atmosphere was tense. The commander had received fragmented reports of enemy activity, but no one had concrete confirmation. The pilot knew that the intelligence he carried could shift the balance in the area, but he also understood that timing, clarity, and accuracy were critical. He needed to convey the information directly without intermediaries, ensuring it could be acted upon immediately. The lives of countless soldiers, civilians, and resistance members depended on the accuracy and speed of his report. The pilot finally approached the commander under cover of darkness. Every sound he made seemed amplified in the quiet of the night, every movement exaggerated in the tense silence. He delivered the intelligence in full detail. The occupation of the village, the presence of spies, and the potential threats to nearby units. The commander listened intently, eyes narrowing as he processed the implications. The weight of the mission, the gravity of the situation was tangible. Lives hung in the balance, and every piece of information mattered. As the commander absorbed the report, the pilot recounted his escape from enemy capture, his evasion through the forest, and the strategies he used to survive. Each story was not just a testament to his courage, but also a practical guide for others who might face similar dangers. The soldiers around them listened with a mixture of awe and disbelief, understanding that the pilot had endured hardships few could imagine, relying on instinct, skill, and unbreakable resolve. The revelation of the spy within their ranks brought a wave of shock and action. The commander immediately organized a discreet investigation, using the intelligence provided to identify the traitor. The process was careful and methodical, ensuring that only those truly guilty were held accountable. Justice was swift but precise, reinforcing discipline and trust among the ranks. The pilot's information had not only provided strategic advantage, but also safeguarded the integrity of their forces. Finally, after long hours of briefing and confirmation of enemy positions, the pilot was acknowledged for his extraordinary bravery. Awards were prepared, honors bestowed, and recognition given for a mission that had required not just courage, but remarkable intelligence, patience, and resilience. The young pilot, once a novice thrown into the chaos of war, had transformed through fire, fear, and determination into a figure of respect, a symbol of what a single individual could achieve through endurance, strategy, and unwavering commitment to duty. He had faced capture, hunger, fatigue, and betrayal, yet he had succeeded. The forest, the enemy, and even the hidden traitor had all tested him, and each test had been passed through a combination of instinct, skill, and the refusal to yield. In the quiet aftermath, as the camp settled and the night deepened, he realized that survival was more than staying alive. It was the capacity to act decisively, think critically, and maintain courage when every circumstance demanded surrender. The pilot's intelligence had transformed the atmosphere of the camp from tense anticipation into calculated determination. Every soldier understood that the stakes were higher than ever. Their village, their families, and the entire strategic position depended on swift, precise action. The young pilot, once merely a messenger, now became an indispensable part of the planning. His first-hand knowledge of the terrain, enemy patterns, and local conditions giving the officers insights that no reconnaissance report could provide. They began analyzing the village's layout using maps, aerial reconnaissance photos, and the pilot's detailed recollections. Every street, building, and potential escape route was marked and discussed. The commander stressed the importance of minimizing civilian casualties while neutralizing the enemy's hold. The pilot recalled secret paths, hidden entrances, and the locations of sentries that he had observed while evading capture. Each piece of information shaped the tactical plan, turning the operation from a blunt assault into a surgical maneuver. At night, the pilot returned to the forest, this time under controlled circumstances, to verify his observations and mark the safest approach for the assault team. Every step was deliberate. He noted every trap, every sniper position, every patrol pattern. Hunger, fatigue, and minor injuries continued to test his endurance. But the thought of the trapped villagers and the imminent liberation fueled a determination stronger than pain or fear. Shadows became allies as he moved silently, listening to distant conversations, counting footsteps, and predicting enemy rotations. The forest, once a hostile expanse, was now a tool in his hands, a living extension of his mission. Meanwhile, back at the command camp, soldiers trained rigorously for the upcoming operation. Strategies were rehearsed, contingencies developed, and lines of communication established. The young pilot was not just an observer, he became a trainer, sharing his survival techniques with the troops. How to remain invisible, how to move silently over uneven terrain, how to anticipate enemy movements, all became part of the preparation. The men absorbed every detail with awe, realizing that this knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. As the operation approached, the threat of betrayal weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The spy, already identified through the pilot's intelligence, had been confined and questioned. Security was tightened, and all communication channels were monitored. The pilot's role became even more critical. He was to guide the first infiltration team, acting as both scout and tactical advisor. His experience navigating enemy territory and surviving alone for days turned him into the perfect operative for this high-stakes mission. Finally, the night before the operation, the pilot walked the perimeter of the staging area. The quiet hum of the forest, the distant call of nocturnal animals, and the whisper of the wind through the trees created a surreal backdrop. he reflected on how much he had changed, from a frightened young man whose plane had been shot down to someone who could command respect, strategize operations, and influence the outcome of life or death scenarios. Every hardship had honed his mind, every threat had sharpened his instincts, and every moment alone in the wilderness had prepared him for this defining mission. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the soldiers moved into position. The pilot led the infiltration team, his eyes scanning for any sign of enemy movement. Every sound, every shadow was analyzed, every potential trap anticipated. They advanced with careful precision, avoiding roads and open areas, relying on the pilot's knowledge of hidden paths and cover. The forest seemed to guide them, every rustle, every bird call interpreted as part of the living map of enemy territory. As they approached the village outskirts, the tension was palpable. Sentries were spotted, obstacles carefully bypassed, and the team synchronized their movements like a well-oiled machine. The pilot signaled the safe route, whispered commands, and adjusted the team's pace based on subtle environmental cues. The operation, which could have been chaotic and deadly without proper guidance, unfolded with methodical precision. Every step forward was a calculated risk, every decision critical. Inside the village, the pilot identified signs of resistance among the remaining local collaborators. Using the intelligence he had gathered and the knowledge of secret passageways, the soldiers were able to neutralize threats silently, freeing villagers and securing key buildings before enemy reinforcements could respond. The pilot's contribution went beyond simple guidance. His knowledge directly saved lives, prevented destruction, and ensured the success of the mission. By midday, the village was under friendly control. The pilot, exhausted but resolute, watched as soldiers secured the area, provided first aid to wounded civilians, and re-established communication with the outer command. The operation was not without cost. Some soldiers had been injured, but the success was undeniable. The pilot's courage, expertise, and survival skills had turned a mission fraught with uncertainty into a triumph. Through this operation, the pilot had evolved from a lone survivor into a strategic asset, a leader whose insight and endurance could alter the course of events. The forest had tested him, the enemy had hunted him, and betrayal had shadowed his every step. But he had emerged not only alive but victorious, and the village he helped liberate stood as a testament to the impact a single, determined individual could have in the vast theater of war. With the village finally liberated, the pilot's role shifted from guiding an assault to ensuring the settlement's ongoing safety. The enemy, though momentarily routed, was far from defeated. The pilot understood that complacency could be fatal. Even a small counterattack could undo all the careful planning and cost lives. He immediately began organizing patrols, setting up lookouts, and training villagers in basic defensive strategies. Every home, every alley, and every approach to the village was analyzed for vulnerability. The forest that had once been a source of concealment for him now became a natural barrier against potential aggressors. He instructed the local defenders on early warning signals, using subtle auditory cues from the surrounding woods, branches snapping, bird movements, distant animal calls, to detect intruders long before they could breach the village perimeter. He taught them the importance of low visibility at night, camouflage, and the silent movement that had once kept him alive for days behind enemy lines. What was once survival knowledge for one man had now been scaled to protect dozens of lives. Every technique was explained with precision: how to move silently, how to observe without revealing one's position, and how to make the forest itself an ally rather than a threat. The pilot also organized a system of communication within the village. Messengers were assigned routes that minimized exposure, signal codes were developed using natural sounds, and small flags or markings on trees indicated safe zones and alert levels. Even in a seemingly peaceful village, tension was palpable. Every rustle in the leaves or unexpected noise could signal danger. The pilot's experience in high-stress survival scenarios made him an invaluable mentor. His calm, methodical approach reassured both soldiers and civilians that danger could be managed with awareness, preparation, and strategy. Despite the structure and organization, the psychological toll on the pilot was immense. He could not forget the days of hunger, exposure, and constant threat that had defined his escape from enemy lines. Memories of being hunted, of sleeping in cold, wet undergrowth, of listening to the distant sounds of enemy patrols, all returned at night. Yet he used these experiences to fuel training sessions and briefings, turning personal trauma into actionable knowledge. He emphasized mental resilience, how fear could be converted into vigilance, how stress could sharpen senses, and how patience and observation often determined the difference between life and death. As the days passed, scouts were sent into the surrounding forest to monitor enemy movements. Using his understanding of terrain, the pilot trained the scouts to identify signs of recent activity: broken branches, footprints, discarded supplies, and other subtle markers that indicated the presence of hostile forces. They learned to track silently, avoid detection, and relay information back to the village without alerting potential threats. The pilot's knowledge, once a means of personal survival, became a shared skill set, enhancing the village's security. A critical breakthrough came when the pilot identified the enemy's potential counterattack routes. Based on his reconnaissance and understanding of local geography, he mapped choke points, natural obstacles, and defensible positions. Barricades were erected at strategic locations, hidden trenches dug along key pathways, and temporary shelters constructed to house lookouts and reserve forces. The pilot oversaw every detail, knowing that a single lapse in planning could allow the enemy to reclaim the village. Soldiers and villagers alike grew increasingly dependent on his guidance, trusting his decisions and drawing strength from his experience. In addition to physical defenses, the pilot emphasized resource management. Water sources were protected, food rations carefully allocated, and stores hidden from potential raiders. He explained how to forage safely, identifying edible plants and potential hazards in the forest, and how to use natural camouflage for both people and supplies. The forest was no longer simply a place of danger. It became a strategic extension of the village's defense, a living asset that could be leveraged to anticipate enemy movements and protect the community. Amid these preparations, the pilot also detected signs of enemy spies trying to infiltrate the village. Using subtle behavioral analysis, observation, and interrogation techniques, he uncovered collaborators attempting to relay information back to hostile forces. Every discovery was a tense reminder that vigilance could not be abandoned. The spy's presence was eliminated, and security protocols were reinforced, making it increasingly difficult for any enemy to gain intelligence on the village's movements or resources. Throughout these operations, the pilot maintained a balance between leadership and empathy. He understood the fear and exhaustion experienced by the villagers and soldiers alike. He encouraged camaraderie, rotated patrols to prevent fatigue, and personally inspected posts to ensure no one was left exposed. He shared lessons from his survival experiences, demonstrating how resourcefulness, awareness, and resilience could be applied to any situation, no matter how dire. By the end of these days, the village had transformed from a vulnerable settlement into a fortified position, capable of withstanding potential counterattacks. Every member of the community, from trained soldiers to civilian lookouts, had absorbed the pilot's methods of survival, defense, and observation. The knowledge that once ensured his personal survival now protected an entire community, turning a lone pilot's ordeal into a shared triumph over adversity. The days passed, but the sense of looming threat never left the village. Every sunrise brought the same question: would today be the day the enemy returned? The pilot, though exhausted from days of planning, reconnaissance, and training, knew that vigilance could not waver for even a moment. His instincts, honed through nights spent in the forest avoiding capture, screamed that complacency was a death sentence. He inspected every barricade, every lookout post, every hidden pathway, and even the subtle natural defenses offered by the surrounding forest. Nothing could be overlooked. The forest, which had once been a sanctuary, could just as easily become a conduit for an enemy ambush. Scouts returned with reports of enemy movements, small patrols testing the perimeter, probing the village defenses. The pilot analyzed these reports with precision, comparing footprints, observing the direction of broken branches, and listening to subtle disturbances in the wind through the trees. He deduced the likely number of enemy forces, their potential attack routes, and their strategy. Using this information, he coordinated the villagers and soldiers, creating layered defenses that blended natural terrain with carefully planned traps and barricades. Every defensive position was reinforced, every approach covered by at least 2 watchful eyes, and contingency plans were established for every scenario he could envision. As the sun dipped below the horizon, an uneasy stillness settled over the village. The enemy had arrived. In the darkness, figures moved silently through the forest, testing lines of sight, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. But the pilot had prepared for this. Hidden alarms, simple yet effective, alerted lookouts to any disturbance. The village became a chessboard, every move calculated, every position strategically critical. Civilians were brought to safe zones, while soldiers took their posts, rifles, and makeshift weapons ready. The pilot himself moved along the perimeter, signaling commands, checking positions, and ensuring that all elements of the plan were executed with precision. The first clash was sudden and chaotic. Enemy forces attempted to breach the outer defenses, but they were met with a coordinated resistance. Fires were set strategically to obscure vision. Noise traps confused movements, and concealed sharpshooters targeted isolated intruders. The pilot directed the defenders with calm authority, his voice steady despite the roar of conflict around him. Every lesson from his days surviving behind enemy lines now came into play, using the forest for cover, predicting enemy reactions, and turning the attackers' overconfidence into vulnerability. Hours stretched into a grueling night of skirmishes, ambushes, and strategic maneuvers. The pilot noticed patterns in the enemy's movements, adjusting defenses and repositioning forces to counter each new threat. He sent small teams to flank the enemy, cutting off potential escape routes and isolating pockets of attackers. The forest seemed alive, a silent partner in defense, with shadows and sounds becoming tools of strategy. Villagers and soldiers alike drew courage from his unwavering presence. Their fear was tempered by the pilot's confidence and tactical genius. At one point, the enemy managed to infiltrate the village's eastern perimeter, exploiting a less visible path. Panic threatened to spread, but the pilot was already 2 steps ahead. Using his knowledge of terrain and prior reconnaissance, he led a counter-ambush, encircling the intruders and cutting off reinforcements. The firefight was intense but controlled, every action purposeful, every shot aimed with precision. Within minutes, the enemy was neutralized and the village's integrity remained intact. The night wore on and sporadic attacks continued. Each engagement tested the villagers' endurance and the pilot's leadership. He rotated defenders, ensured supply lines remained functional, and maintained communication across the entire settlement. Even in exhaustion, he remained alert, analyzing every sound, every shadow, and every possible sign of movement. Mental acuity became as important as physical strength. One lapse in judgment could have catastrophic consequences. By dawn, the enemy was in retreat. The pilot and the villagers had held the line, turning what could have been devastation into a hard-won victory. The forest was silent once again, but the echoes of the night's struggle lingered. The pilot surveyed the aftermath. Barricades intact, defenders accounted for, and the village still secure. Each survivor's eyes reflected gratitude and a hard-earned respect for the young pilot who had guided them through peril, transforming fear into strategy, chaos into order, and potential annihilation into triumph. In those first hours of morning, as the sun broke through the canopy, the pilot allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had faced impossible odds, survived capture, navigated hostile terrain, and now led an entire community through one of its most dangerous nights. His journey from isolated survival to tactical leadership had transformed not only his own understanding of resilience, but had instilled the same principles in every person who now depended on him. Survival was no longer just an instinct. It had become a shared skill, a network of preparation, courage, and disciplined action that turned a small, vulnerable village into a bastion of resistance against overwhelming threats. The morning after the long night was eerily quiet. Smoke from the defensive fires still curled lazily into the sky, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and scorched earth. The villagers emerged cautiously, eyes scanning the forest for lingering threats, while the pilot walked among them, assessing the toll of the battle. Each face he passed reflected exhaustion, fear, and relief, all intertwined. His heart still raced from the previous night's skirmishes, but he knew that vigilance had to remain. The enemy could regroup, and complacency now could undo all the hard work and sacrifices that had preserved the village. It was during this fragile calm that intelligence surfaced, a revelation that shifted the battle from the external to the internal. Reports indicated that a spy, embedded within the ranks of their own forces, had been feeding critical information to the enemy. The realization sent a shiver through the pilot and the village leaders. A betrayal of this magnitude could have cost them everything, turning their organized defenses into traps that the enemy could exploit. The pilot's mind raced as he analyzed possible culprits, cross-referenced suspicious behaviors, and traced subtle inconsistencies in reports that might have indicated the spies' activities. After meticulous investigation, it became clear that the spy had been attempting to sabotage their operations systematically. Every strategic maneuver the pilot had orchestrated during the previous night's attack could have been rendered useless had the enemy known of weak points. The villagers, soldiers, and even some of the reserve teams had unknowingly followed a script that the spy tried to disrupt. Yet, through a combination of intuition, careful observation, and prior reconnaissance, the pilot had mitigated the potential damage, inadvertently neutralizing the spy's most dangerous efforts before they could fully materialize. The uncovering of the spy was both dramatic and instructive. The young operative was found hiding among supplies, documents, and coded messages that detailed plans to undermine the village defenses. The pilot, now acting as both detective and judge, coordinated with trusted elders and commanding officers to ensure justice was swift but measured. The spy's exposure served as a stark lesson. The greatest threats are not always external. Internal vulnerabilities, even when invisible, can be as lethal as any ambush in the forest. With the spy neutralized and the village secure, the focus shifted to the pilot's role in the night's events. News traveled quickly, first among the villagers and then through official channels. His resourcefulness, courage, and leadership were recognized not as mere survival instincts, but as strategic brilliance that had preserved lives and maintained control against overwhelming odds. Orders were dispatched from higher command, acknowledging the young pilot's extraordinary contributions. His actions had not only defended the village, but had also ensured that crucial information about enemy movements reached headquarters, directly influencing future tactical decisions. Recognition brought a complex mix of emotions. Pride mingled with the memory of fear, and relief was tempered by the awareness of what could have gone wrong. The pilot reflected on every decision he had made, each maneuver, each moment of instinctual calculation. The night's success was a product of preparation, observation, and the ability to act decisively under extreme stress. He realized that courage alone was insufficient. Mastery over knowledge, terrain, and human behavior had been equally critical. As the day unfolded, preparations began for formal acknowledgement. Villagers and soldiers organized a small ceremony, gathering to honor the pilot for his unwavering dedication. Medals were ready, words of gratitude prepared, and the story of the night's defense began to circulate. In the pilot's mind, however, the greatest reward was not recognition. It was knowing that his actions had saved lives, preserved a community, and turned fear into structured resilience. Every family that had survived owed their continued existence to the careful orchestration, discipline, and mental fortitude he had displayed. The pilot's personal journey, from a downed soldier lost in the forest to a decisive leader orchestrating a defense against overwhelming forces, had reached a pivotal moment. He had proven that survival was only the first step. True victory required transforming instinct into strategy and fear into calculated action. His understanding of the forest, of human psychology, and of tactical execution had matured beyond what most soldiers ever achieve. By the end of the day, As the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened once again across the forest, the village was safe, the spy punished, and the young pilot's reputation firmly established. But the lessons of vigilance, intelligence, and decisive action remained imprinted in every corner of his mind. Every tree, every path, every whisper of wind in the canopy reminded him that survival was not merely enduring, it was anticipating, observing, and acting with precision when life hung in the balance. The night's victory was both a closure and a beginning, a testament to what one person could achieve when skill, courage, and strategy converge against the forces of chaos and betrayal. The night descended once more upon the forest, thick and suffocating, blanketing the landscape in a shadowed silence that could conceal both safety and peril. The young pilot, now recognized as a hero by the villagers, felt no relief. The events of the past days had etched themselves into his mind with a clarity that neither time nor accolades could erase. Every rustle of leaves, every distant owl call reminded him of the fragility of life, of how quickly order could collapse into chaos. The weight of survival had been replaced by the weight of responsibility. He had saved lives, uncovered a spy, and ensured that critical intelligence reached the command. But the cost of this victory lingered in every thought, haunting him in quiet moments. In these hours of solitude, he reflected on the choices he had made, decisions that had seemed instinctive during the chaos, diverting enemy patrols, scouting alternative routes, rationing water and supplies, now appeared in a new light. He understood that survival was never merely physical. It was a symphony of calculated risks, mental resilience, and moral courage. Had he been less disciplined, less observant, or less willing to confront his own fear, countless lives would have been lost. And yet, within the heroism lay a profound isolation, the knowledge of danger, the intimate acquaintance with death, and the necessity to act decisively under pressure created a chasm between him and those who had not experienced such trials. The villagers, while grateful and admiring, could not fully comprehend the psychological toll of days spent evading death, navigating hostile terrain, and confronting betrayal. To them, the medals, ceremonies, and praise were tangible symbols of valor. To the pilot, they were reminders of nights spent shivering under a broken wing of his plane, days spent tracking enemy movements, and hours listening for the faintest indication of ambush or deception. The forest had taught him lessons that no formal training could impart. The subtle signs of danger, the instinctual knowledge of when to trust intuition over sight, and the awareness that survival often depended on the quietest actions, the smallest decisions executed with precision and calm. Amid this reflection, he received word from command. Further missions awaited, assignments that would test not only his skill as a pilot, but his endurance as a human being. The recognition he had earned came with obligations, and with them, the knowledge that the front lines remained unpredictable, that enemies, both external and internal, could strike at any moment. His mind wrestled with conflicting emotions, pride and fear, hope and dread, relief and the anticipation of new challenges. Every accolade was interlaced with a profound understanding that the forest, the enemy, and even human frailty could turn triumph into tragedy in a heartbeat. As the pilot prepared for what lay ahead, he also confronted the moral consequences of the night's events. The spy's punishment, though necessary, weighed heavily upon him. While justice had been served, the act of witnessing the unraveling of a human life, the confirmation that betrayal existed even among allies, brought a somber gravity to his consciousness. He realized that heroism was not only about triumph, but about the courage to carry the consequences of one's actions, to navigate the gray areas where morality and necessity intersect. In these silent hours, he grappled with questions that had no easy answers. Could trust ever be absolute? Could loyalty survive when fear, ambition, or desperation intervened? Despite these burdens, he found solace in small victories. The village remained intact, the intelligence had reached the command intact, and the broader mission continued toward strategic success. Each life saved, each obstacle overcome, each choice made with foresight and courage reinforced the understanding that survival was a continuous negotiation between human skill and the unpredictable chaos of the world. The pilot's journey had transformed him, not merely into a soldier, but into an observer, a strategist, and a custodian of life under extreme conditions. Night after night, as he prepared for further flights and missions, the pilot internalized lessons that extended beyond war. He recognized that fear could be a tool, not a paralyzer, that observation and patience were as critical as action, that knowledge, empathy, and foresight were weapons as potent as any rifle or aircraft. The forest, the enemy, and the betrayals he had encountered became part of his consciousness, guiding his every decision, sharpening his instincts, and cultivating a profound respect for life in its most precarious forms. By the time dawn broke again, painting the forest in soft golds and muted shadows, the pilot had solidified a new understanding of heroism. It was not in medals, recognition, or ceremonial honors. It was in the quiet, deliberate choices that protected life, preserved knowledge, and ensured that every action had meaning. The lessons of fear, survival, and moral courage were etched into him permanently, a guide for the next mission, the next encounter, and the next moment when the fine line between life and death would demand his total focus. Even as the village celebrated his achievements, he remained vigilant, aware that survival was never a static accomplishment. Each breath, each decision, each glance toward the horizon carried the weight of potential peril. And yet, this vigilance, this profound engagement with the challenges of existence, revealed a deeper truth. That courage, when paired with wisdom, foresight, and an unwavering sense of duty, could not only save lives but also transform the survivor into a symbol of hope, resilience, and enduring human strength. The forest had begun to feel less like a threat and more like a teacher, its dangers etched into the pilot's very instincts. Every step, every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of a wild animal reminded him of lessons hard learned. Patience, observation, and subtle strategy often outweighed raw courage or strength. His journey back to command had transformed him. He no longer simply reacted to danger, he anticipated it, interpreting the faintest signs of movement, scent, or sound as vital information. The human mind, honed under such extreme conditions, could read the forest like a map, predict patterns, and avoid traps unseen by others. He had become both observer and actor in a living, breathing ecosystem of threats and opportunities. Days of relentless movement had refined not only his physical endurance but his perception of risk. Crossing rivers swollen from recent rains required calculation. Currents could sweep even the strongest swimmer into deadly undertows. Submerged branches could immobilize a foot in seconds, and what seemed like a narrow passage could hide predators waiting silently. Hunger and thirst pressed upon him like invisible weights, gnawing at concentration and tempting rash decisions. Yet he understood a fundamental truth. Panic was a killer. The mind clouded by fear or impatience could sabotage even the strongest body. To survive, he had to remain calm, deliberate, and attuned to his environment in every sense. By the time he neared the outskirts of the enemy-occupied territory, the forest had become both ally and adversary. He had learned to recognize edible roots, track the faint movement of patrols without being detected, and find shelter that provided warmth without attracting attention. Every challenge was a test of ingenuity and observation. Small victories, catching a fish with improvised tools, constructing a hidden sleeping platform, rationing a single sip of water over hours, became monumental achievements. Each one reinforced the critical lesson that survival was a series of cumulative decisions. One error, no matter how minor, could prove fatal. His return to the village was fraught with tension. Enemy forces still patrolled the area, alert to any sign of infiltration or escape. Yet, the pilot's knowledge of terrain, his understanding of human behavior, and his sharpened instincts gave him a crucial advantage. He moved with silent precision, using shadows as cover, pausing to listen, and calculating every step to avoid detection. When he finally glimpsed the familiar outline of his commander's headquarters, relief and apprehension surged together. The mission was far from over. The intelligence he carried about the spy and the enemy's occupation was vital. One misstep could compromise not only his own life, but countless others relying on the information he bore. Upon reaching the commander, the weight of exhaustion and tension finally pressed upon him. His uniform was tattered, face and hands marked by the elements, yet his resolve remained unbroken. He conveyed the information in precise, urgent terms. The village had been infiltrated, a spy had compromised positions, and immediate action was necessary. The commander's expression transformed from disbelief to urgency, recognizing both the risk and the courage required to deliver such intelligence. The pilot had not only survived the forest and enemy territory, but had successfully navigated a complex web of threats to bring critical intelligence directly to the heart of the operation. The commander's orders were swift. A coordinated effort neutralized the spy, restored order in the occupied village, and secured the strategic position. The pilot, meanwhile, received medical attention, nourishment, and finally a moment to rest. Yet, even in these moments of relief, the events of the past days lingered. The forest, the escape, the evasion, and the moral complexity of the spy's fate weighed heavily on him. He understood that heroism was not merely action, but the endurance of consequence, the perseverance of mind and body under extreme pressure, and the navigation of ethical dilemmas under life-threatening circumstances. The village celebrated the pilot, yet his awareness of mortality and responsibility had deepened. Every medal, every congratulatory word, and every cheer reminded him that life had been preserved not through luck, but through vigilance, strategy, and disciplined courage. He had become an embodiment of resilience, a living example of how preparation, intelligence, and calm under pressure could bend fate in favor of survival and duty. The experience left him with a profound respect for the human capacity to adapt, endure, and act decisively, even when the world itself seemed aligned against survival. As night fell over the village once more, the pilot sat quietly, reflecting on the full scope of his journey, from the wrecked aircraft to the depths of enemy territory, from the hidden dangers of the forest to the moral complexities of wartime intelligence. Every step had been a lesson in observation, patience, courage, and the relentless will to survive. The forest, the enemy, and the spy had all tested him to the limits of human capability. Yet, through perseverance, strategy, and a disciplined mind, he had prevailed, not simply to survive, but to ensure that others lived, that critical intelligence was delivered, and that the human spirit endured even in the darkest hours of war. The dawn broke gently over the village, painting the war-scarred landscape in muted golds and silvers. But for the pilot, the weight of the past days lingered heavier than any morning light. The air smelled faintly of smoke, damp earth, and the distant metallic tang of war, a reminder that survival had come at a cost. Each step toward the gathering of soldiers and villagers felt both triumphant and solemn. He was returning not merely as a survivor, but as a witness to what human endurance, courage, and unwavering focus could achieve in the face of overwhelming adversity. The commander approached him with a solemn, measured stride, the lines on his face deepened by worry, responsibility, and recognition of what had been accomplished. With a firm handshake and steady gaze, he commended the pilot for his extraordinary bravery, quick thinking, and determination to carry vital intelligence through enemy territory under conditions that would have broken most men. Around them, the soldiers and villagers who had survived the occupation gathered in hushed anticipation, a collective acknowledgment of the pilot's harrowing journey. Whispers spread quickly of how he had traversed forests, evaded enemy patrols, and returned with critical information that would shape the outcome of the local campaign. The formal ceremony was simple, yet profoundly moving. The pilot was awarded a medal for courage and service, a tangible symbol of recognition, yet the honor felt secondary to him compared to the life lessons that had been forged through suffering and survival. Every scratch, every bruise, every sleepless night spent navigating the perils of forest, river, and enemy territory had left an indelible mark on his character, sharpening instincts, patience, and understanding of the fragile, precious nature of life itself. He realized that true heroism was not the gleam of a medal, but the steadfastness of mind and body in moments when surrender or panic might have been easier, safer, or even instinctive. As he stood among his comrades, the pilot reflected on the enormity of what had been accomplished. The spy who threatened their village had been found and dealt with. The intelligence he had risked everything to deliver had changed the course of local operations. Lives had been saved because of his actions. Yet, beyond strategy and survival, the experience had reshaped his understanding of human resilience. He saw clearly that courage was a living, adaptive skill, honed under pressure, rather than merely an abstract notion spoken of in speeches or taught in classrooms. It demanded mindfulness, awareness, and an unwavering willingness to act despite fear. Returning to quarters later that evening, the pilot found a quiet moment to absorb the totality of his journey. He thought of the forest, the dense undergrowth, the rivers and ravines, the silence, and the hidden dangers that had threatened his life at every turn. He thought of the days spent rationing water, foraging for food, and resting only when absolute necessity demanded it. He remembered the enemy soldiers, the fleeting moments of near capture, and the mental gymnastics required to avoid detection. The memory of the spy lingered as well, a stark reminder of the moral complexities war imposed. Sometimes, survival required the swift and difficult application of judgment beyond immediate emotion. He also thought of his comrades and villagers, of the lives that had been safeguarded by his perseverance. Their gratitude was unspoken in many ways, yet palpable in every cautious smile, every nod of respect, and every whispered acknowledgment of the courage it took to traverse unimaginable hardships. The pilot understood that his journey was not only a personal story of survival, but a microcosm of the larger human struggle during the war. Resilience in the face of chaos, clarity of purpose amid uncertainty, and the integration of intelligence, skill, and courage to influence outcomes that mattered far beyond oneself. The night deepened, and as he looked out over the village under a canopy of stars, the pilot experienced a profound sense of quiet triumph, mingled with humility. The forest, the enemy, the spy, and the trials he had endured had taught him that survival was not merely an act of living, but an orchestration of observation, strategy, ethics, and endurance. It required more than physical stamina. It demanded the continuous sharpening of intellect, perception, and emotional resilience. Life itself, in its most extreme forms, had become a teacher, and he was both student and practitioner. Ultimately, the pilot's story was one of transformation. From a young, inexperienced airman, he had evolved into a figure who embodied the principles of courage, intelligence, and adaptability. His journey through the forest, across enemy territory, and back to command was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to overcome extraordinary challenges. Medals, recognition, and stories would endure, but more importantly, the internal growth, the mastery of fear, the honing of instincts, and the development of ethical decisiveness would accompany him forever, shaping every action, thought, and decision in the years to come. In the stillness of the village, with war continuing beyond its borders, the pilot realized that heroism was not a singular moment, but a continuous process of facing danger with clarity, making calculated decisions under pressure, and preserving life while upholding responsibility. His experience served as a beacon to others, a living testament to the power of courage intertwined with strategy, the wisdom gained through adversity, and the extraordinary potential of human resilience when every instinct, every observation, and every decision is harnessed toward survival and the greater good. The forest had tested him, the enemy had pursued him, and the world had challenged him, but he had endured, adapted, and ultimately prevailed, leaving behind a story that would inspire generations to understand the profound interplay of courage, intelligence, and the will to survive in the most extreme circumstances imaginable.